Welcome to Going for Two, where we're kind of going for two and a half or three at this point. We're going to have the fantastic and talented Matt Waldman on the show tonight. I'll give him a more formal introduction in a moment. But I want to say, hey, Sharona, how you doing?
Hi, Zachary. I'm wonderful. How are you?
Great. So, do you enjoy using your lawyerly talents when it comes to NFL off the field issues?
Not particularly. I mean, I really wish that they were not required, and I didn't have to correct the madness, particularly surrounding violence against women and issues concerning women. But unfortunately, the dialogue being what it is, I feel compelled to.
So you want to talk at all about Greg Hardy, or are you so done with this you want to move on? Kind of like the Titans in 2014.
I'm happy to talk about Greg Hardy. It's an interesting situation facing the National Football League with their so-called renewed interest or a greater interest in addressing violent acts against women and children, and their revamped domestic violence policy and their new task force against domestic policy and domestic violence, and so what will they do? Greg Hardy underwent a trial in a lower court without before not before a jury, because that's not how it works. Many states have that duality legal system where there's a smaller court and a bigger court. When you go have your case heard in a smaller court, it's legally binding, but you have a 10-day window to appeal that decision. He did appeal, asked for a jury trial, and was scheduled to have a jury trial. And then, as these cases sometimes tend to go, she quit cooperating. They apparently reached a settlement. There's credible reports that a settlement was reached, and so the case was dismissed. But we still have a situation where, he did have a judge hear the case and find him guilty, and we'll see what the National Football League decides to do, with that situation. I said all along that it was going to be a minefield for them, because these cases are often, they very, very seldom go to trial. They're very seldom prosecuted. They're not easy cases to begin with, and so we'll see how the NFL handles this one, and all eyes are going to be watching, and I think that they know that. I'm sure Lisa Friel knows that.
Yeah, isn't it? I mean, in a case like this, Greg Hardy's an NFL player who has made tons of money, so hiring a lawyer for a case like this can't be a cheap experience. That's got to be part of it, and then willing to go through all the public nonsense
Yeah,
where
but let's not forget, he drew his salary. He was placed on the exempt list. He was not financially harmed in any way by the lost games that he missed last year. He earned his money. 13.1 million, I believe, was the
franchise.
final, yeah, the final tally. And so now here we are, and what do we do?
Okay, Matt just direct messaged me to say he was sitting in here waiting. I don't know if he's in Google Plus or what the deal is, but just to let you know. Nice time to interrupt, huh?
That's fine. Let me send Matt another link. I don't know. Maybe the links aren't working. Let me see if I can't get Matt in here.
Google Hangouts, nothing but technical issues. Things happen,
Fun stuff.
but it's all about the love ultimately. So basically, Greg Hardy probably will get suspended, but it's a test for the NFL, kind of.
Yeah. Well, yes. I find it hard to believe that there will not be a suspension leveled. 6 games is what we're hearing now. 6 games is what the policy, there's a part of the policy discusses that. First time offense is supposedly 6 games. So, and let's not forget, too, that the NFLPA has had issues with the very unilateral decision by the NFL to do that. It wasn't collectively bargained. They've not technically haven't signed off on this new policy, and so, you know, we'll see. We'll see how they opt to handle it.
Yeah, because I feel like, I mean, legally, obviously, Ray Rice's situation is different in that he ended up getting married, but he got kind of a slap on the wrist legally. I mean, it's kind of like a misdemeanor, I think, in the end.
Mhm. Yeah, he pled down. The majority of criminal cases that are resolved are the results of a plea deal that involves lesser charges. This is not very. It's not. I was not shocked at the conclusion of the Adrian Peterson situation. It took two go-rounds with a grand jury to even get an indictment. But getting an indictment in Texas on those kinds of issues is really difficult. So yeah, you know.
Hi, Matt. We decided to bring you in
Hey,
on
Matt.
a light
Hey,
topic. We're just talking about
Right.
domestic violence and Greg Hardy because Sharona has the legal background, so I figured she could fill in some of the details that
And
some of
some pretty strong opinions about it, Matt.
I would imagine so. I would
the.
imagine so. I don't think anybody. I would hope everyone would have a strong opinion about that. But
Yeah.
so what's yours?
Well, I first of all, always the dialogue when it comes to these things is very harsh toward women and toward the alleged victims. And one of my pet peeves is that, and so I often feel compelled to try to at least keep that conversation somewhat close to reality. And so yeah, I mean, I like that the NFL is at least acting like they care. We'll see how it works in practice.
Right, I'm right there with you. I don't think I could. I don't think I could add any more to that I haven't already talked about in a lot of length. But I would say, yeah, it's. We'll see if they do more than just
Lip
talk the
service.
talk. Yeah.
Mhm. Yep.
Yeah, it's time for a real challenge, and I really appreciate your Houston Oilers pennant there in the background. That's pretty
Yeah,
cool.
I was checking that out.
Yeah, I finally was able to. Now that I've moved, I've finally been able to. It's kind of funny. I mean, like when I'm doing shows, it looks like that my place is like a football man cave. I think it's the only thing that I have here that's up here like that, and everything else is
I
pretty
also
much
like your
different.
chair, Matt. I want that chair.
Oh, that one back there? Yeah, I
Hmm.
appreciate that. Yeah, so it's been nice. All
And,
these pennants used to be up in my room when I was a little kid, and then I was able to finally pull them out and actually put them up somewhere. So
and I
between
see
that,
you're a cat guy. You and Zach with your cats. I'm gonna have to get my dog in here.
yeah, I've got one. So he's 13. I don't know if you want your
Oh.
dog in here. He might my cat might put a saddle on anybody's dog, so he's kind of
Well,
crazy.
your cat just exited the room. He or she was like, "I'm out of here."
Yeah, pretty much. So he's done with this routine by now. So
My dog is currently laying in the floor right over here with her nose semi stuck up underneath the love seat because apparently she stuffed one of her toys under there.
what kind of dog do you have?
She's a terrier mix. I call her a terror mix.
Nice.
Mm.
Sounds about right. Okay, so pet talk aside, because it's all about hot pet talk here, and going for two, we're going to do a little intro for our special guest. So if you're not aware of Matt Waldman's work, before I metaphorically slap you upside the head, type mattwaldmanrsp.com into your browsers. Check out his back issues of the Rookie Scouting Portfolio, which will be called RSP for the rest of the show, and read his content on footballguys.com, Football Outsiders, and check out his RSP Film Room and an upcoming guest column in Cat Fancy. Tonight, we have him on the very big show to discuss all kinds of football goodness. What does it take to become a dedicated film scout? What does it take to decide to give up on a football team that you've been rooting for years when they lose their identity? And what about motorboating? We spent a fortnight mourning the Patriots Super Bowl win. Now it's time to look forward to this fantastic offseason in the NFL draft. Hello, Matt. Good to see you.
Well, good to see you guys as well. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for joining us.
Definitely appreciate it. So what's first?
Well, Matt, in my Ask Your Fantasy Football Expert series, you were the number 10 guy out of now 140, and you were my first two-parter. So when I interviewed you, gosh, it was like 4 years ago. Man, I'm getting old. Anyway, you said you were going to give the RSP 3 more years to see if it turned out to be a moneymaker. So is it safe to say you've reached your goal since this is 4 years later?
It's working out. It's gotten to the point now that I won't say that I'm only going to give it a few years. It's certainly a long-term endeavor at this point for me now. So it's working out well. A lot of that has to do with just the community that we have on Twitter and what we have online, and that's worked out very well. And I think part of it too is just the nature of any type of publication. When you're trying to start on a publication, you probably should give it about 5 to 7 years. And I kind of knew that heading in, and I knew it was going to be a marathon. But when you kind of hit that wall at the 20-mile mark, you are, sometimes you're like, all right, well, if it's a little too painful at this point, maybe it's time to start thinking about whether or not you're going to call it a day. But I still felt like a few years would be worthwhile, and it turned out that I think it was that next year that things really started to turn a corner. So it's been great, and thanks to you guys and being folks that I've had who've just been very supportive of the work that I do and share what I do to everyone else. So it's been very helpful. So thank you.
Well, I'll say you're welcome for everybody in the universe. Looks like Zook's going to make an end run here. So let's get the backstory of the RSP, kind of how you put it together the first year and how it's kind of developed into something that's pretty much a staple for fantasy and real footballers.
Sure. Well, I mean, I've always been a football fan, and I was working in an operations sector for a company for about 15 years and had transitioned over in the final 5 years of my career doing a little bit more quality management for that company, and started learning more about using databases and performance evaluation methods, and really incorporating the best practices into that. And it was something that with every company, if you ever worked for a corporation, oftentimes they try to get best practices as something that's they want to get you certified in it, and be able to, if you're going to be someone that's going to drive change within a corporation, you want to be able to have someone certified and be able to spread that message and sell that message from the top down. So I was that person, and as I was working through all of that, I played in fantasy leagues just like everybody else. I did a little bit of writing for a fantasy website, FF Today, and I think I'd been there about a year. And I just saw something, that Gil Brandt had written about Brian Westbrook, and it was something to the extent on NFL.com where he said, if this guy was an inch taller and 10 to 15 pounds heavier, he would be a top 5 pick overall, rather than being someone that they projected as a second, third, or fourth round pick. He ended up being picked in the second round, and I kind of started to realize why that was, and it didn't have a lot to do about talent. But I was interested in talent because I figured if the character part worked out and all of the other issues that the NFL rightfully is concerned about work out, then I want to know how good these people are and not have it be obfuscated by character, injury, all of that. So I just started, I figured that I could learn to scout players by using a lot of those methods. So I use a lot of those methodologies to apply to the way that I scout, study players and study film. And the first year I did it, it's a lot different than what it is, now 10 years into it or 11 years into it. But that was kind of the impetus for it, and it just turned out that, the people who saw it and liked it became diehard fans, and slowly but surely I've been getting more and more diehard fans as the years have gone by.
And it looks like you got one fan right there.
This is my assistant here, so he's going to make sure I'm in line here.
I've got one exactly like that. He loves to crawl up, sit beside me, and help.
Yeah, that's the way it works. I mean,
Hmm.
this and usually if I'm scouting players, if it's a bad quarterback or a pass rusher, he's usually up here. So I'm not sure what this is about. Maybe he thinks I'm about to get sacked. So
Personal protector, maybe? I don't know.
yeah, maybe
Um,
bodyguard.
can you talk about Darkness to Light and what pushed you to donate a portion of your RSP proceeds to charity?
Sure. Darkness to Light is an organization that is a nonprofit charity that is devoted to training people about the issue of sexual abuse, how to prevent it, how to recognize it when they are seeing the effects of it within children in communities. They provide training to community organizations, whether it be schools, whether it's fire departments, civil service organizations, or even individuals who want to have that in their neighborhoods or softball teams or whatever, whatever community type of group. And so they've done work with Penn State in recent years after the scandal that happened with I'm trying to remember the name. I can't remember the name right now. I'm tired. I've been watching a lot of film, but basically, we're looking at that's basically what they do. So the reason I've done that, I mean, I could probably give a lot of reasons, but I would say probably the best one I'd say is that I've known people personally who have been affected by this. I have certainly seen the damage that it has done for to people and their families and in their relationships with others, how they see themselves, and it's a subject that's often been very taboo and not talked about. And I think that after the incident at Penn State and all the fallout with that, I thought it played out exactly the way that those dynamics normally play out.
Hmm.
And I felt like that as football fans, it would be a nice thing that if we were going to invest in, if people are going to invest in another product devoted to football and the glorification of college athletes on some level, which is what my product does on some levels, I thought it would be good to be able to at least give a little bit back to an organization that would prevent this type of thing from happening again, or at least try and train people so that if it does happen, they know how not to compound the mistakes that happen. Because obviously college administrations and how that was handled was as an egregious of an issue in many respects as the actual crime.
Hmm.
So it's something that I always like to give back to the community, but as someone who now is probably spending more time studying film than actually getting out of the house at this time in my life, I felt like that being able to donate a portion on behalf of the RSP would be a way of being able to get out in the community and give a little bit until that I have more time to be able to do that on my own.
Yeah, I think that's great that that happens. And often in our industry, we don't get to point out some of the good stuff that's being done. So it's definitely a good gesture to make, and just to kind of allow people to see another side, the softer side of Matt Waldman. Look at that. Although the softer side is great. Yeah. Anyway, I'll get far away from that comment right now. So do you consider the off season like your favorite part of the NFL calendar, or is it just kind of an underrated part of the full experience?
I think it's an underrated part. It's kind of like seasons. You have favorite aspects every season of the year, and certainly this one is a lot of fun from the standpoint of that you have a lot of optimism surrounding who your team's going to pick, what the possibilities are for these players, and basically also how your team could be reshaped and reformed through free agency and off-season trades. So it's really in that respect, I would say that it's a great time. It also gives you a chance to kind of reflect and plan and think and kind of dream about what's going on rather than just dealing with the actual reality of what's happening in the league, which is usually what you see in the summer and fall.
I don't even think saying there is no off season is even. I don't think it really registers because it doesn't. We're already talking about free agency, or we're talking about off-field stuff. It seems this week. We're not talking about the one play in the Super Bowl. Okay, I'll throw this one in real quick because you've become a a Seahawks fan. What was your experience of the game, and did you kind of enjoy the fact that the final play got so kind of broken down in a way where you always do this, so everybody else was kind of getting a taste of what it's like to review just one play and what part all these different players had in that game-changing play?
I think as a fan, it was just more like, not again. I mean, really for me, I've been a fan of three teams that have essentially lost a huge game that could have meant a potential championship, or at least a championship appearance, by 1 yard. So for the third time in my life, I've experienced that as a fan. So that which is kind of funny, because at this point, while the first time was the roughest, the second time was certainly not fun either. This time is kind of more like, well, that's just part of that's part of life, that's part of the game.
I suspect the Music City Miracle is in there somewhere, Matt. Is it 1, 2? I know it's not 3.
It's
it's 2.
Well, that was a highlight. That was certainly a highlight of my. That was a highlight as a fan, was to watch that.
I mean the Super Bowl.
Oh, you mean the 1 yard? Oh, certainly. That was the second time. So that was certainly
the first one.
The first one, I was a Browns fan. So so it was Ernest Biner at the 1. So that was
right.
Yeah. So that one still stings. I actually saw Ernest Biner at the Senior Bowl and was next to him when we were watching DeMarco Murray at the Senior Bowl a few years back, and I think it was the one fan moment that I was like really resisting the urge to have. So.
Mm-hmm.
But finally, after about an hour and getting a chance, he broached some conversation after an hour or so. When it was over, I kind of broke into fan mode for a little while. But yeah, I mean, it was fascinating to see all the different talk about it. But what I really found interesting about it all was really just kind of the philosophy of how this team works, and trying to find a way to connect that one play as well as the play at the end of the half, the decisions at the end of the first half, and show how that really is about their mentality as a whole. And in some ways, while you would have liked to see them give it to Marshawn Lynch, and certainly I think most of the logical world would probably still say that should have been the case, you can understand why, if most of the logical world was also saying kick the field goal, don't go for the touchdown at the end of the first half, that this is the mentality of this team that's aggressive, takes chances, and believes in itself, and is going to play to win and not try and go for just the simple conventional method there. So even if it turned out that the offensive coordinator was the one who made the call and it was a bad call, and Pete Carroll in his heart of hearts would have said, yeah, I admit it, 30 years later, says, I admit it, I would have given it to Marshawn Lynch too, but I didn't. I was just trying to cover the behind of my coaching staff by saying it was my fault. I mean, it's about delegating. It's still about believing in a certain philosophy, and if he trusts his players, and if his players make mistakes, he doesn't bench them in ways that you would see other coaches do so immediately with a hair trigger. So I imagine the same is extended to coaching and coaching philosophy.
I'm not going to debate you, Matt, but I am probably one of the few who's like, I can understand the play call. I understand why people automatically think giving it to Marshawn Lynch is the way to go there, and certainly the outcome of that play wasn't what Seahawks fans would want. But I mean, you've got to trust your quarterback too, and they were looking to catch the Patriots off guard. Everybody thought there would be a timeout called, and Russell Wilson's pretty good in his own right and has made that play. Didn't they score on that same play?
Yeah, I mean, it's a play that's worked out for them in the past, and Sharona, I agree with you. I mean, I think that I don't think it's as cut and dried as just give it to Lynch in that respect. But I mean, I understand why people may feel that way.
Sure, yeah.
But I'm right there with you. It's like, look, if you're trying to think about keeping the team off balance, and Russell Wilson got you there, at the end of the Packers game, he may have screwed it up, in terms of his performance for 3.5 quarters or 3 3/4 quarters.
Well, he had some help too.
Yeah, he sure did. But at the same time, he is a huge reason why they've gotten there 2 years in a row.
Yeah, and just considering that I think all of his receivers were undrafted free agents, or it was something else.
Yeah.
Yeah, with Paul Richardson out.
Yeah.
And just to see the fact that just the coaching decisions, like you mentioned at the half, they had 30 seconds and they ran it twice and got two like 15-yard gains, and to go for it with 6 seconds left, and the fact that Belichick, benched his nickel corner and put in the guy who made the big play. I guess they said they were in goal line, but they also had three cornerbacks in, so they were ready. But it was just a good play.
Yeah,
Give
and
the guy
look,
credit.
the reason I'm a big Titans fan or a big Seahawks fan is that after the Browns left for Baltimore, really I was just looking for teams that I could identify with the Browns that I grew up with, which was tough defense, strong running game, power running game with usually a versatile back or set of backs, and a playmaking quarterback, a smart quarterback who was tough and could make plays, with a coach who was willing to be aggressive at the right moments. And I felt like, that's how I became a Titans fan, with Steve McNair, Eddie George, Samari Rolle, Derek Mason, the whole crew of Titans players, and I identified with them because they reminded me of the AFC Central teams that I grew up with. And then when that personnel finally just kind of whittled away and was churned out, due to retirement, injury, or just getting canned, as in Jeff Fisher's case, it wasn't. Being a football fan has changed a lot for me over the years. So I was the type of Browns fan that if you've ever gone to those YouTube channels and seen the Browns fans who, like, there's one particular guy who's downstairs in his weight room in the basement who's like going crazy pretty much after every game, or in his car, and he's like ranting and raving and talking about that type of stuff. I was probably about a step and a half away from that growing up as in terms of that kind of fan. And I think that, once that team left, I've never really been the same as a fan. So, Titans was pretty close, but not so big. And I've realized I became more of a fan of personnel and teams and how they work together, not organizations. So I could care less about Bud Adams. I could care less about how that team's built. I'm more interested in what's going on the field with those players and how they work together, and the coaching staff. And so when that nucleus left, and I saw Marshawn Lynch get traded to the Seahawks, I started to see a team that looked a lot like, the Titans and the Browns before that. Tough defense, strong running game, smart quarterback who's tough and can make plays, and a coach who isn't afraid to take chances. And that's, I won't be surprised if 10 years from now I'm a fan of a different team at this point, because that's just how it works out when if I was still in the same, if Cleveland had never left for Baltimore and then they got replaced with whatever's there now, hopefully they build it back up and it works out. Maybe I would have never changed teams, but at this point, I'll be one of those fair-weathered fans probably, or accused of that for the rest of my life. So.
I love that story, Matt, because I literally begged Zach to get you on here, because I broke up with the Titans during the off season. I held on as long as I could, and that's where I am. The Seahawks are really hard not to love, and I agree for exactly the reasons why you love them and why a lot of people love them. I grew up like you on football. I can't remember a time when I wasn't a football fan. I was a Dallas Cowboys fan growing up. And, Jerry Jones ran me off. And so, it became a team that I didn't recognize. And the Titans are now a team that I don't recognize and don't identify with. So I can completely relate to you.
Yeah, I think it's important. If you grew up with roots in a city, and those are your roots, and you stay in that town forever, and you identify with that town in that way, I get it if you're going to stick with the team through thick and thin. And I think if there was a team that I hope to see turn it around and become a great team, it would be the Cleveland Browns. Even if I became a fan of them again, it would never be the same. It'll never be the same as what it was before. So I think that for some people they have that mentality, and that's great. But I think as someone who watches so much football and has become much more appreciative of personnel and personnel decisions and how players play, I'm much more of a fan of players, not a uniform and a logo.
What do you think about Ken Wisenhunt and the new staff? Do you mind answering?
Sure, I'd honestly don't know enough to probably to be someone that would give you a great expert opinion, but I think that as with any staff, I don't think I mean, I remember Ken Wisenhunt when he was an H-back for the Falcons and at Georgia Tech, and watching him play at Georgia Tech. So he was a good football player. He was a smart football player. He certainly has, as someone who I think has had some success as a coach in the offensive football game. And I just think that he and this team needs to have some sort of cohesiveness, and that means that the owner needs to be patient. The owner needs to be able to give that team the opportunity to mold that team in the way that that the coach wants it molded, and to give them a chance to see if it works out. And hopefully, if the team doesn't experience injuries and they don't make too many boneheaded picks, and they have enough picks that work out on the positive side of that register, then you could see a competitive team shape up there. And I think that's really the hope there, because I think that, to me, that's the biggest problem with the NFL, is that with free agency, it's just kind of deteriorated to the point that you don't have these teams really grow and become units the way that we saw them growing up.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Completely agree.
Yeah, just when you mentioned the Titans and like the four things you're looking at for a franchise, I'm like, wow, 0 for 4. So yeah, maybe we'll see, because I mean, you mentioned your background in quality assurance and how NFL teams don't really seem to have much of a focus there, and they are rather quick to give ups, like the Browns, who basically fired their entire everybody after like 1 year last year, and it looks like they're still having some issues. So with your kind of that background, is it your opinion that many NFL franchises could use your help in that regard, and kind of that quality assurance role?
I would be completely delusional to say with any level of gravity that they could use my help. Okay, so I would certainly say they could use some help, and I think that help would be probably, I think, a process of things that I've suggested with, a Football Outsiders article where I talked about, if I won the Powerball and I had a team that I could build it and own it and do whatever I wanted, here's some of the things I would do. And I actually had an interesting conversation with Dan Hatman, who was a scout with about four teams in the NFL, and he read that article and agreed with a lot of what I actually had to say about it, based as someone who has been inside the game. And I've also had a couple other people who've been inside the NFL kind of say, yeah, you point out some things that are endemic to, or some issues that are problematic for the league when it comes to scouting and evaluation. So I would say that, yes, there are a lot of teams out there that probably don't have a good system, and a lot of that has to do with that when your PR machine is so good that people forget about the problems that you're having months later, or just don't pay much attention to them because the quality of the game is good and strong enough that they're not making a huge deal with decisions. It's not like they're not buying tickets or they're not watching the game. If all of that was happening, then they would be forced to probably reshape their product and how they put their product on the field, and build better teams and better units and things like that. But they don't have to do that. They can churn it in the way that they are, and it works for the owners and it works for the teams in the long run. They don't have to build winners to be winners when it comes to the balance sheet. And so as a result of that, if you're just from a fan's point of view, they need help, because a lot of their systems are based in the national scouting system, the Blesto scouting system, that was around as the centralized unit for that team. I mean, imagine if like corporations used, some sort of process for purchasing their materials to do their job, and they had some centralized unit that wasn't a part of their company basically doing it somewhere, and they just modeled after that, and they've just been continuing to go by that model as we've had changes to technology, transportation, to what the raw materials themselves, and they've continued to live like 50 years behind the times. That's basically what's happened in the NFL. But the problem is that the media and the media has kind of got that war correspondent mentality where they're just proud to be embedded with the troops, but they're not
Mm-hmm.
allowed to really report on everything for fear of basically being excommunicated from the process. And
Losing
so
access.
losing access, exactly. So that's part of the problem with this, is that we get shoveled a whole bunch of golden light about how advanced everything is, when it's not even really close to that being the case. Most people would be probably horrified to learn some of the things that at least gets shared from scouts, just on like a kind of in a veiled way or in more vague terms, just about, when it comes to analytics, for instance. You hear about analytics a lot, but, knowing someone who does analytics for teams and has been a scout and does a lot of different work around the league, he'll tell you that there are only a handful of teams that are really even like just out of the Stone Age, not even like in the Golden Age or approaching the Golden Age of what eventually could be with analytics. So, the idea that when we see something that the San Francisco 49ers are embracing analytics because they bought some sort of database or some sort of technology, they bought a tool, they don't know how to use it to its maximum capacity. It's just more of like a company buying customer relation management software because it's cutting edge and they spend a lot of money on it, and they realize when they get it that they have to have employees who know how to use it and managers who are going to embrace letting it be used the way it's supposed to be for it to actually work. And that's part of the problem.
So yeah, it's a lot of issues. So tell me, we can go back into the kind of history books again. So how did you get hooked up with the football guys, and how did you get to become part of the Audible and all that good stuff?
Football. I mean, I was a fan of football guys since probably like the mid to late '90s. Whenever it is that they transitioned to being football guys and not two different entities, with David Dodd's site and cheatsheets.net and Mr. Football, which were the two sites that they were run by Joe Bryan and David Dodd separately. But when they came to become one company, I had a friend of mine, a coworker of mine, we were in a league together, and he was like, "Have you checked out footballguys.com?" And I'm like, "No." He goes, "They're probably the best site out there." So I checked that out and had been on their message boards, just kind of lurking for a while, and had been a fan. I actually wrote for them back in, I think, like 2001. I think I wrote a guest article once about sleepers or something, and then decided that I didn't have time to really write about fantasy football, so I just stopped. They were just kind of like, "Yeah, we like this. Would you like to do some more?" And I'm like, never answered them. Just kind of never did anything, and kind of went back into my own little world of real life for me at that time. And but after working with FF Today for a while and doing the rookie scouting portfolio, Cecil Lammey and Sigmund Bloom contacted me. I had been in leagues with David Dodds and competing in some of those showcase types of leagues that sites do, and put it up online and say, "This is what we're picking in the preseason," type of stuff. So I'd gotten to know some of the football guys through competing with them, and then it was Lammey and Bloom who asked me on during draft season, because one of them had seen the RSP and said, "Who's this crazy guy doing this stuff? We need to have him on air and have him as an interview." And that just kind of worked out, and it seemed like that people enjoyed having me on, so they'd have me on more often. And then eventually, I'd always thought it would be fun to work at Football Guys, and at one point the opportunity just came up where it seemed like it was the best fit. So I asked Cecil about it, and he put me in touch with David Dodds, and it just kind of all went on from there. So eventually they had me on as guests, and I guess that me being a guest on the Audible, it just turned out to be one of those deals where they looked at the numbers, they looked at the response, and felt like, would you like to be a permanent part of the show, on the live show? And I've been pulling pranks on that show ever since.
Yeah. So what's the road trip like that you take with Cecil, and I guess it was Gene was involved this year, between kind of Atlanta and Mobile, and what's it like kind of hanging out with those guys for
Well,
the Senior Bowl week?
It's great actually. I mean, the first time was with Cecil, and certainly it was a number of years ago when Bloom, Bloom and his Bloom's wife had their baby, and Bloom decided that it was probably, they decided as a family it was probably best for him to stay home for a while until Miles started to grow to a point where that it wouldn't be it would be easier on the family when it's time for him to be able to consider coming back and doing this. So, Cecil asked me if I wanted to come along, and it was great. It's a great experience, when you work with someone and you get along with them, to be able to actually spend time with them in person, and to have conversations that are not budgeted by time. So, a lot of that's fun, just getting on the road and getting to know someone even further in a way that you may not always just being online and having conversations like this. So that was great. And then, Gene, it's been, I think this is third or fourth year for Gene, and that Gene's been a part of it, and that's been great. It's been a little bit more of an adventure with Gene, because Cecil's been flying down and Gene and I have been driving. One time we ran out of gas in the middle of Alabama, and so we have a good story about that, where I basically left Gene out on the side of the road for a little bit and ended up practically hitching a ride with somebody, and he turned out to be an ER nurse, which was good, because he was nervous about picking me up on the road, which I can kind of understand why. And then and I was kind of nervous about being picked up on the road. And what was kind of funny is he's like, I said, yeah, I kind of, at the time I was doing some blog work with the New York Times, but I elaborated, I exaggerated a little bit more, saying, yeah, I work with the New York Times and we're covering the Senior Bowl, because I figured that any nut job that was going to pick me up might reconsider if the New York Times might be looking for me, if I don't come answering from there. But he was just as nervous as I was, so it worked out fine. But it's a good time. I mean, certainly it's just a chance to, these people that you work with become, they're your colleagues, they're your friends. You oftentimes I spend as much time talking to these guys as I do any coworkers that I have in my day job, and I'm probably better friends with these guys in that respect. I mean, I like the colleagues I have at my day gig, but certainly, these folks I'm probably closer to. So it's personally, it's a lot of fun, and it's also a chance to get to know a lot of people in the industry who are doing a lot of the work that you do, and they understand. You don't have to talk about, there's a lot of layers that you don't have to establish when you have conversations with people who stay up late on their second or third job studying football players and trying to evaluate them, and then also share that on social media and the internet. You don't. There's a lot of things that you don't have to talk about. You can already just kind of start off from a point of layers that you don't have to establish.
So what's it like because you watch so much darn film, miles of film, as I think I joked in a previous post. But what's it like getting to see these guys in person, and does that kind of help you with your evaluations, and then having the opportunity maybe to have talk to them in person?
It can. There's so many different layers to what you're looking at, and I think part of it that's helpful is how well they take instruction. Do they learn? The first day they're learning a new offense, or at least learning their part in a new system. Some of them are playing new positions that they didn't play when they were at college. I mean, some of them are getting used in ways that they weren't going to be used in those roles. Maybe they were a defensive end, now they're being put at linebacker. Maybe they're playing one type of receiver role, and now they're being used in a different one. So the roles can be different. Maybe they're running more zone plays than gap plays as a running back. So there's adjustments there. So you want to see how much they grow. And football is very much, in my opinion, a performance sport. It's a performance in the way that music is performance, that theater is performance. It's a craft. It's an art in some respects. So practices are rehearsals, they're lessons, they're private lessons, they're types of things where you may see them grow and develop there, but then you may not see it automatically translate to the stage that next week. It might take months for whatever they learned in that practice to translate onto the field, and part of that is their on-field awareness, their ability to deal with the crowd and pressure, and
Mm-hmm.
the situation's not going as planned. But certainly that's helpful to watch that growth process. Interviewing them is helpful because you do get a chance to see a little bit about um, their personalities, but that's always something that you have to be very careful about, because you can have someone whose personality you dislike greatly, or you aren't familiar with. Really, you may come from a very different background than they do, and you may project your background and what you think is right onto how that person's behaving, and then on top of it, you're projecting maybe your background and your age and your level of maturity on someone else's level of maturity that is going to grow tremendously by leaps and bounds in many cases between the time you're having that conversation with them and maybe 2-3 years later. Because we have to remember that a lot of these guys, you know, I have a 22-year-old daughter, and the difference between her from 19 to 22 is dramatic. She was always she was always a good person, and she's always been a hard worker, and she's always been someone that I've loved greatly and admired for her intelligence, for how she handles herself. But the way I look at it is, and just be blunt, we're all, whether we went to Harvard or we went to community college or didn't go to school at all, or we're working at the Kroger, we all have moments of genius, insanity, and sheer stupidity.
Yeah.
And so, and I think that, the fortunate thing is we do not have to be thrown under the lights while all of that's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And people may say, well, that's their choice. It is their choice. But if Bill Murray, who I think we would all agree, if we've seen anything about Bill Murray in the past 10 years and what he does in his own private life and how crazy cool all of that is and how grounded he seems in a way that would, in an oddball sort of way, when he talks about fame and says, look, no matter where you came from and how well parented you were and how smart you are, when you become famous, the first 3 to 4 years, you're going to become an absolute jerk. And a part of that is, and you can't help it, and a part of that is because you get thrown so far outside yourself. So think about what these guys are going through, and think about what they're through, one of the most richest learning periods of their lives and the greatest amount of development going on in their lives. And at the same time, they're being scrutinized more than anybody that we would, than all but maybe 0.05% of the population, and they're going through all that. I don't think most people really think about the magnitude of how difficult that is. So there's a lot that's cool about what you can evaluate with the Senior Bowl, but there's also a lot left that's a kind of a gap there. That's kind of more of a wait and see moment. And even, I'll be honest, here's a guy that I haven't really talked about a lot, Chris Polk. Chris Polk was a player who played, he's a running back for the Eagles who's played fairly well in limited time behind LaShawn McCoy, who I really liked at Washington. But I went to interview him at the Senior Bowl, and he was just tired of being interviewed, and you could tell. And after about 3 questions, I just thanked him and got up and left, because I knew that he was just not in the mood. He wasn't behaving in a way that I would say was it. I would say that he was just tired of it, and I understood that, and I interview people for a living, so I know. But I heard a lot of people say he was unprofessional. He was just kind of bratty. He was immature. They dinged him a lot for all of that. But at the same time, we're not dinging reporters who are up there on media day asking. I'm trying to remember the kid, but he was a wide receiver out of Texas A&M just a couple years ago, big tall guy who had Jeff Fuller. Jeff Fuller had a very fine sophomore and junior seasons, looked like a first round pick, and had a horrible senior year. And here he is after practice having to listen to someone say, you were horrible as a senior. Like you really just like messed it all up. How does it feel to like be here and have to try and reclimate all of that? Or Amir Abdullah after practice having someone in his home state of Alabama basically ask him questions to defend his religion.
Mm.
Do you really, that's the kind of stuff these guys deal with fairly regularly, even by the enlightened media. So,
Hmm.
you know,
Yeah, I've always said that there's a reason why Marshawn Lynch doesn't want to talk to the media. Maybe you might want to think about that and give some consideration to why that is. But you said something, Matt, that I want to follow up on because I think it's sort of brilliant. I was a double major actually in college, but English Lit was part of my studies, and I was involved in theater. And I think one of the more and I love that comparison because I do think that one of the more underrated areas of analysis and looking at guys is that interaction within the position and with their teammates and how that does fit together because that is so important and it's especially important like offensive line play it's absolutely crucial in how an offensive line will work together. And I would like to see a little bit more of that incorporated into analytics and what we do when we study film and look at guys.
yeah, I mean, I think I've written recently about if you try to deny emotion in the game, then you're missing a big chunk of football. And Ryan Riddle, the former NFL player
Mm-hmm.
and college player and Bleacher Report writer, who's a good friend of mine and just who I like to plug as much as I can for the fabulous work he does. He's very much we've talked about team building before, and he said he's talked about how he really likes players who thrive off emotion. He wants teams that have a high level of emotional intensity to how they play. And just because we can't measure emotion in the way that maybe we need to adequately, to understand how to harness that in a way that's academic and scalable, then it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It doesn't mean that it's not important. It doesn't mean that teams haven't used it and thrived off it. And we all have to handle emotions, and part of it is knowing when to put emotions aside, when to embrace them, when to feed off them, when to counter them. And those are all choices, and some of them are strategic choices. Some of them are things that are a little bit more esoteric in nature. And so yeah, I mean, I maybe one day that'll happen, but I think that part of it is the interview. That's why someone like Teddy Bridgewater, it was such a big deal in the draft Twitter community and and last year, with him kind of getting dinged for things that just didn't seem to make sense, and part of it being his personality. When you could really, if you have any level of experience as an interviewer, you can see that this kid is just quiet and introverted, but the intensity is there. You can see that he was someone that thrived off of intense moments and was a very tough student of the game who was accountable and who was a quick study and very intelligent and took a lot of pride in the work that he did, and that he didn't need to be the rah guy. And I think the problem is that it's just like any type of environment. And I'm sure Sharona, I mean, there are people that I'm sure you've either had interviews or interviewed people or have been interviewed where people want to see people who are interviewing you are really already have an idea of, in their mind, a mental picture of who this person across the desk from them should be. And if you're not that
Mm-hmm.
person, they've kind of already blanked out and gone somewhere else,
Mm-hmm.
or
Absolutely.
yeah, or they're looking at you askance like, what planet are you from? Like you have three heads, And I think that Teddy Bridgewater got a little bit of that because, they have an idea of what they want a quarterback to be. And Blake Bortles is the ideal version of what a quarterback looks like. Maybe not how he plays, but what he looks like. He looks like he looks like that he's someone that you can invite to play golf. These old school guys would play golf with and would do, who would do all the endorsements that they want to do. And he'd be rah and Mr. Up personality and, all the types of things that trace back to even what you think of a stereotypical high school football player would be, that you'd see on, your classic, sitcoms or romance movies, and and unfortunately, you still have GMs who look at things in that fashion because that's the generation they came from.
Well, this is probably a good opportunity to kind of transition into, because you have a very kind of analytical look as to how players are rated. But how over the years do you deal with kind of off the field concerns like a player of the Titans may draft, Jameis Winston, and how does that affect your rating of a player or how you think they might fit in a team? I mean, you wrote about this, on your blog, but I figured it'd be a good chance to talk about it.
Sure. I mean, I'm writing more and more about what I think about a player because I think it's important that in the RSP, I don't factor character. I just don't. I have no means to do that adequately. I don't know. I don't get investigative reports. I'm not in law enforcement. I don't have an FBI background who can do and have someone who has an FBI background who can do consulting for me and look at all the databases that are available to be able to pull up traffic records or go into a town and follow kids around and find, interview a bunch of people and find out what their regular habits are. I don't have the time or inclination. So really what I study is flat out talent, and character is only anything that is very obvious on the internet that I can find that's been established through some sort of court case. And even then, there's a story behind that. But I just look at, well, they were convicted of this or charged with that, and not whether or not they're a troublemaker or not. That's what it is. And if you want to read into it, you read into it. But when it comes to, I also find that people want to know what I think of Jameis Winston, and I also think it would be unfair of me to say I think it's important that if I have a very strong opinion about a situation, that I need to put that out there. So, Jameis Winston to me is a good prospect. He's probably he's one of the top 2 quarterbacks probably in this class. Though I haven't done my rankings yet, I wouldn't be surprised if he is in the top 2, and I wouldn't be surprised when I do a fantasy ranking that if he's not in the top 10, if he's drafted in that range, and NFL teams say we're gonna take the plunge with him and make him our future starter, then he's going to be up there. But I have no qualms being able to say, watching him on the field, I can see how he could be a potential long-term starter for an NFL team and a good one. But what I've read in the New York Times investigative report, and what I know about the issues that plague college campuses and the culture that exists, that directly and indirectly condones crimes of that nature, I'm inclined to believe that he was involved in this. I'm inclined to believe that he raped this woman. I may be, like I've said in the article, I may be dead wrong. And if I'm dead, I hope I'm dead wrong. I hope that there's something that comes out that without a shadow of a doubt, we would someday find out that this was all, not the case. But based on what we know about rape, what we know about how our culture handles these types of situations, I'm more inclined to be cynical about it and believe that, look at the report and say that's probably happened. So if I were drafting a team and I owned a team, Jameis Winston would not be on my board based on what I know now. Now, if there's more information out there and there's more that would counter that and I would be sufficiently satisfied with it, then I would say, okay, fine, we'll take the heat, we'll deal with the situation, so that with the fallout of that, and if he's truly the type of guy that's a good good community guy who's immature and made some mistakes, then I'm sure he'd be more than willing to do something to go way out of his way to try and counter that reputation, to do good for the community, and be able to take some of that heat and be the man that I would imagine that he would claim he is, to be able to stand up against that kind of violence against women, and to be able to stand and to be more of a proactive proactive person in that community to try and help this cause in a healthy way. And that's how I would look at it as an owner. I'd say, if he really didn't do it, I'm sure he'd be more than happy to spend some time doing that to to do that, because he'd be realistic about understanding what his image is and not run from it like Michael Vick. So I mean, I would look at, Michael Vick. I think Michael Vick ran from the dog issue. I think that he's still running from the dog issue, and I'd say he's faster running from that issue than he is on the field right now. So I mean, I look at that. I look at those situations, and it's it's a shame. But at the same time, I look at those players, Jameis Winston, Michael Vick, talented guys. Watch them on the field. I can divorce myself from that, because it's really about what's going on with the law. When it comes to evaluating them, I have no problem saying they're good or borderline great or could be great, because really the legal system has to take care of these guys, and they need to be able to step up in a way too that that doesn't deal with influence from the community out that they're in with, whether it's Florida State or the NFL or something else, and they need to stand up and be able to take a harder stance. And it also comes down to our communities being willing to take a harder stance on these issues. And if they're not, then the NFL and whether they're playing in the NFL or not is like step 10 in this process. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to sit here and stand up and sit there and go, I'm not going to evaluate Jameis Winston, or I'm going to give him a bad report based on what he's doing well on the field, because of the fact that the first 7 to 8 to 9 steps have failed. I mean, there's a place where the buck stops, but that's a little far down the line for it to be. Everyone has to say it has to stop.
I think for me, I loved what you said. I think for me, I would be incredibly cynical if Jameis Winston all of a sudden started acting like he cared, because all of his actions since this first came to light have been just the opposite.
Yeah.
And so from that perspective, you would call me cynical or call me a realist. I really don't care, but I would think at that point that it's all just PR and appearances, and he's being led by the team to do this, and he's not doing it on his own.
Yeah, and I would agree, and I would say that I would think that if you're truly innocent, and you truly feel like that this was something, or you're truly trying to find a way to,
or you think you made a mistake.
Yes, I would think that over time, you'd have to go through that and say, people aren't going to believe me for a while. That's okay. I'm going to keep doing this because I'm passionate about this, because I've learned from this mistake, and I want to do whatever I can to make amends. I've met people who have done things in life that they're not proud of. I've hired people who've done things in life that they're not proud of, and they don't care what you think. I mean, they do, but they really care more about looking in the mirror every day. They care about that more. They're more worried, whatever slings and arrows that are coming their way from you and I are not nearly as painful as what they put on themselves. Mm-hmm. And I think that those are the people who are repentant and are reforming and are reformed and are trying to actively address things that they feel like that they want to do. So to me, I look at someone like Jameis Winston, and I would say if this truly isn't an issue, this is a perfect opportunity for him to use it as a bully pulpit to do good. And I think that maybe, it would be nice to see if that would be the case. And if it isn't, then it isn't. But, that would be, as an owner, as a GM, as someone who would be looking at this kid, that's what I would be thinking about is, and I know a lot of people will say, well, that's not realistic. And I'd say, yeah, it probably isn't realistic. But, then again, 3 years ago, having a 5'10" quarterback lead a team to 2 consecutive Super Bowls wasn't realistic either.
That's true. So, Matt, let's get us back to talking about you. We've been talking about other people all night. So, talk about your film room hangout. How you kind of started that out, and bringing people in and kind of breaking things down and letting people see the process.
Yeah, I mean it's been a lot of fun, and it was actually something I wanted to do years ago. One of the players that I studied was a running back who most of you know if you followed the RSP, was Chad Spann, who's running back out of Northern Illinois.
Oh, I
And
have to just really quickly interrupt, and I know it's really rude, but Chad Spann led to like one of the most epic like fantasy football auctions we ever had in my dynasty league, because we have a really deep league, and I thought it was because both of us followed you, but really the other guy was just kind of bored, and yeah, he ended up going for the second highest amount that any fantasy player had ever got in our league.
well, Chad
Yeah,
would.
anyway.
Chad, in all immodesty, I would hope, would say that he was very much worth that, but never got the shot to like really prove it. So, but Chad's someone who bounced around the NFL, and he's still getting calls, but I'm not sure, whether or not this is going to be something that he's going to continue to try and do. He seemed to get hurt. He had injuries happen just as he was making a good impression with each team that he's been with, or he had coaching turnover, and when you have coaching turnover, the new coaches bring in their guys, and the guys on the bubble get tossed out, and that's happened with the Texans and with Todd Haley moving in with the Steelers before that. So Chad was someone that during this time when he was a college prospect, I wanted to watch film with him. I thought it would be fun to watch his own tape and do a show based on that, but there weren't Google Hangouts back then, and so I ended up just diagramming plays and doing it, and it didn't really work out as well, but it was the idea of watching film together was just something that I thought would be really cool to do on air. And then when Google Hangouts became available, I did a couple of experiments of that with Josh Norris over at Roto World. We watched Joseph Randall together and recorded it, and it just didn't come out well. I just didn't feel like I had a good familiarity with the technology. The technology was still growing, and also just feeling comfortable enough of how to host and handle that was something that I needed some work with. So this year I just decided it's been 2 years since then, I think, and I decided to take the plunge with it because I felt like it would be a good opportunity to really have readers of mine get to know other people in this industry who do fine work, to be able to also talk about issues that are tangential to to scouting players and player evaluation, but are still very important to it, and just give people a chance to see what it is that we look for and how we look for it, and just kind of be in the room. It seems like everyone always joked around, I'd love to watch tape with Matt Waldman. I'm thinking, no, you probably won't, but if you really think that, then okay, let's do that. Let's go ahead and put it on air and see who actually watches this. And to my surprise, we've had a pretty good viewing, and we've had, I think I've had over 500 subscribers on the YouTube channel after 27 episodes, which is pretty darn nice to have. And the people who are doing it with me seem as excited, if not more excited, than the folks who were watching it to be on. So it's a great pleasure to have them on. So it's nice that the feeling's mutual for them, and I've in some cases I learn an awful lot, because we're studying players that are not just skill position players, but also offensive linemen, defensive linemen. So if you haven't seen the RSP film room, I would recommend, first and foremost, first episode I recommend is the one I did with Lance Zierlein, who is with NFL.com right now, doing a lot of their draft evaluations this year, and he's also with the Sideline View, which is his own blog, and we do one on Brandon Scherf, but I'll just say he does one on Brandon Scherf. I'm kind of more just the host role in that one, and I was more than glad to do so and just kind of shut my mouth and let him talk, because he gave an absolute clinic, and I had scouts come back to me and say, you realize that guy probably knows more than a lot of the NFL coaches at offensive line in the league right now, and he even has his own takes on certain things. And his dad was an NFL offensive line coach. He would be, I would say that Lance is eminently qualified to talk about that position, and it showed, and it got noticed from the community outside the medium.
Well, Matt, you've definitely caught on to my interview style. Let the smart people talk. So I'm glad you're with me on that one. So we'll get a little jokey question before we call it a night. So are you more like Bill Belichick when it comes to studying personnel in film or in clothing style?
Oh, definitely in clothing style. I mean, that's probably both. I would say that I would say though that I would aspire to be like Bill Belichick. I would say in that regard, but in clothing style, yeah, this is just don't care mode for me, and I've been in just don't care mode for about 7 or 8 years now. Um, at this stage of my life, I'm about 5 months past due of a haircut, and I'm surprised that my wife puts up with me at this stage, but every once in a while I clean up a little bit and we go out, and then people don't recognize me. So that's that's the thing. Maybe one day in about maybe in the next year or two, if things kind of calm down, I'll start looking like um, you know I'll start looking like an older version of your average pro quarterback, non-Teddy Bridgewater like pro quarterback, and people will be surprised, and then they'll no longer want to watch me.
That could be it, man.
Well, I doubt that.
It's all part of the persona. So, Sharona, did you have anything else you wanted to ask Matt before we, let him
Yeah,
get back to film
just real
properly?
quick, what do you think is Bill Belichick's greatest quality as a coach?
I think he's adaptable to the situation, and he values intelligent players, and he lets intelligent players do their job. And I think that that's probably the most compelling trait about him and those teams. And so I'm a big fan of what they do. I love rooting against the Patriots, but I'm a big fan at the same time. So it's
They're
I
a
don't
team
think
you love to hate.
they are a team I love to hate, absolutely, and I have complete respect for them in that regard.
Mhm.
So it's and a lot of it has to do with Belichick. I do wonder about some of the positions that they scout and how things work out, but I feel that way with a lot of teams, and then I look back on some of my own decisions and what I like and don't like, and wonder the same thing. So there you go.
So, Matt, tell everybody, where can they find you on the internet and the world and all that good stuff?
Pretty simple. If you go to Twitter, it's at Matt Waldman, and my name is spelled Waldman. That's my last name, Matt, Matt. So it's at Matt Waldman. You can find me tweeting there, and I'll be tweeting stuff from the rookie scouting portfolio, which is www.mattwaldmanrsp.com. And you can get my publication and look at my blog posts and the RSP Film Room. All of that's there. You can also just look up RSP Film Room on YouTube and subscribe to the RSP Film Room there. And then you can also find me, of course, at footballguys.com, where I've written the gut check for the past probably 11 years now, it seems like. I've been writing that column for fantasy football, and then for the past 3 years now, I've been at Football Outsiders writing a column called Futures, and you can find it there. And I'm just basically looking at prospects and talking about this kind of stuff that we've been talking about a lot tonight.
Weren't you the one that did the prospect profile on Bishop Sankey for Football Outsiders?
It was me, yes.
I used your article. I actually compiled a bunch of data on Ken Wisenhunt and Bishop Sankey. I was one of the lone voices saying, "Don't buy it. Whoa, pump the brakes on Bishop Sankey."
Well, I'm glad to hear that, because I know that there's certainly a lot of University of Washington fans and a lot of Titans fans who were like, "No, he's the greatest thing ever," and certainly he, maybe one day he gets it together and shows a little bit more. But I'm still like you. I'm cynical that that's going to be the case.
Osai, the Titans. What are you going to do? Okay, well, Matt, thank you very much for being on the show. It's nice to kind of get to see you since we've chatted a ton, and we'll have to get to Bambanelli's one of those days.
Absolutely, my old stomping grounds, man.
Yeah, there you go.
You live like right where I grew up. Like you live not far from where I grew up. That's crazy.
It's all about location, location, location. So before we call it a night, Sharona, what you have going on?
Well, we are going to be broadcasting a show this week on Game Over with Vashti and Sharona. Probably it's looking like maybe Friday. Vashti and I have both been very busy this week. If you haven't checked that out, we talk about all kinds of sports, so stay tuned for that. Always check me out at NFL Female. writing about the National Football League now, and I haven't written. I've been a little bit on a break following my breakup with the Titans, so I haven't written at Pro Player Insiders, but I'm getting ready to crank back up over there and write some wonderful stuff on. I'm going to be looking at player profiles and looking at players more on the human aspect.
Sounds good. Well, I am getting back into interview mode, so I had Justin Bailey on, who's working with RotoViz, one of them young smart dudes playing a lot of daily fantasy. So check out that interview at Zach Law Online, and just ZACH_Law on Twitter. You're gonna get a lot of nonsense and me retweeting a lot of smart football people like Matt. So everybody, yes, thank you again, Matt. You're totally awesome and all that.
Yeah,
good
thanks,
stuff.
Matt, for joining us. Really appreciate it. You were wonderful.
Well, thank you for having me on, guys. It was a lot of fun.
So for intelligent fantasy and regular football commentary, go to Matt Waldman and, of course, Sharona. So thank you, everybody, for coming in. We'll just say good night and good luck.